So it's really just a remarkably unusual period. And so, I've got an outlook, I've got a baseline outlook because we are charged with submitting economic projections as part of the FOMC summary of economic projections. And we, make some assessments of how the economy is going, like I just did. And then we sort of put together some projections. And so, like the median FOMC participant, I see the second half of this year much stronger. Obviously, the second quarter is going to come in at a very negative number, minus 30, 35%. It's really the unemployment rate that's probably a easier to assess indicator of how we're doing. The growth numbers are so large, even if next quarter's growth is 10 or 20%, it's quite a lot to keep track of. And so with the unemployment rate at 11.1% right now, things have come back a little more quickly on the labor side than I was guessing. We're still struggling to figure out whether or not that's just a timing that more states opened up, more workers were called back to businesses than we thought, but it's just the same number that we were sort of expecting over the next 3 or 4 months. Real question is, what's the momentum going to be in the second half? I think the continuing virus spread is likely to put a damper on consumer sentiment, keep it a little bit lower. Now, that's part of my baseline assessment, is that we're probably going to see some of these outbreaks. And that's another question, which is the outbreaks that we're seeing. I asked my staff this. We've got an assumption that we've got some outbreaks. Is this in line with that assumption, or is it more than what we were thinking? And I think it's still too early to say. But I'm looking at the end of this year for the unemployment rate to be like the median FOMC, 9.5%. And I think that next year with reasonable growth, that could be 6.5% unemployment, which is still a high number. That's usually sort of a recession kind of number, although we'll be seeing growth that'll certainly indicate that we're not in a recession. But I'll say that's my baseline. Now, the likelihood of that coming, it might only be 50% because there are other scenarios that are also in play. That's part of your VW whoosh kind of thing. And it's kind of like a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I guess the W is sort of a little bit of that. If we have something closer to a second wave type of outbreak, I think that's going to mean the employment situation is going to struggle a lot more in 2021 and growth accordingly. So that's pretty troubling. And then when sometimes I'm talking with people and they kind of say that scenario might be almost as likely as that baseline that we're talking about, that's a lot of weight on the downside. So I'm worried about the downside risks. And I think that's how policy needs to be positioned to make sure that we can get through this in households and businesses as best they can during these adverse circumstances, where it's really important that people be allowed to maintain their safety to get on top of the virus control.